Iran is now threatening to increase its enrichment of uranium. Now, this runs directly against the 2015 nuclear deal that it has with world powers. But the timing of its decision and sort of the meaning behind it actually shows sort of the stretch of how things have gone for Iran lately when it comes to the nuclear deal, when it comes to its relations with Europe and the wider world, as well as its relations with the United States. Now, the 2015 nuclear deal actually grew out of negotiations that Iran had secretly at first with officials from Barack Obama's administration in Oman, and then later openly that it had with the US and other world leaders. That culminated in the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers, which broadly saw Iran agree to limit its enrichment of uranium in exchange for the lifting of really crushing economic sanctions that the country faced. In the time since the 2015 nuclear deal, a lot has changed. Probably the most important thing that's changed is the US chose to elect President Donald Trump in 2016. Now, what that did was put the US on a pretty stark collision course with Iran over the nuclear deal. Trump campaigned on the idea that the nuclear deal was a bad deal. He called it the worst deal in history. And part of his reasoning was that the deal did not deal with Iran's ballistic missile program. It also didn't deal with what he described as Iran's malign influence across the wider Middle East. So after he entered office, the Trump administration put more and more pressure on Iran, put more and more pressure on those involved in the Iran nuclear deal, and ultimately, a year ago today, Trump pulled America out of the nuclear deal. In the time since, Iran has really tried to work with European partners, with China, with Russia, and others to find a way to get around U.S. sanctions and get around U.S. efforts to basically stop the deal. Now, recently, Europe had said that it had come up with a trading mechanism for Iran to continue to do business with European businesses, but so far that really hasn't panned out. And more recently, the U.S. has decided to end all waivers for countries buying Iranian crude oil. Crude oil is a really important part of the Iranian economy. So with these waivers gone, basically that would put any country that buys Iranian oil in jeopardy of facing U.S. sanctions and being locked out of the U.S. financial system. Now that was just a step too far. So today, which is the one-year anniversary of Trump pulling out of the deal, we saw President Hassan Rouhani address the nation from a cabinet meeting. This speech was televised. And it happened just after a series of letters were given to foreign diplomats in Tehran outlining Iran's plans and what it was going to do. Now, what it was going to do, and what it said it was going to do, is it was going to stop selling its excess heavy water, which is a kind of coolant that it uses in nuclear reactors that can help produce plutonium, as well as stop selling its excess enriched uranium. Now, under the terms of the nuclear deal, they're only supposed to have a certain number, or a certain amount of kilograms of enriched uranium and a certain amount of tons of heavy water. Now, since it can't, recently, the U.S. has blocked Iran from being able to sell enriched uranium to Russia in exchange for unprocessed yellow cake uranium. And it also stopped Iran from being able to sell heavy water to Oman. Now, with that being stopped, Iran really didn't have any other options on where to put this extra uranium or put this extra heavy water. So by choosing to do this, it's showing that Iran still is trying to negotiate with the Europeans, with China, with Russia, and with everyone else to see if there's still a way to come to a terms where they can still sell crude oil, they can still have parts of the nuclear deal intact. But time is running out. Hassan Rouhani, in his speech today, put a 60-day time limit on talks. And he said that if talks don't resolve the problem within 60 days, Iran will begin to further enrich uranium. As of right now, Iran enriches uranium to about 3.67% richness. That you can use for a nuclear power plant. Now, what that also does is it limits the ability of Iran to use that uranium to potentially build a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran always denies that it's ever had plans to build a nuclear weapon, so they obviously, at this point, with this lower enriched uranium, couldn't. Now, the trouble comes if Iran chooses to more highly enrich its uranium to 20% or higher. That makes it much closer for it to be able to build a nuclear weapon. Again, now Iran does say that it doesn't want to build a nuclear weapon, but the higher it enriches its stockpile of uranium, the greater that risk becomes. And that risk was, in theory, what the 2015 nuclear deal had set out to stop. If Iran decides to enrich uranium to about 20% richness, that means that it can more quickly bring the uranium up to 90% richness and above. Now, 90% richness is what you need to actually build a nuclear weapon, and that's what Western powers have always been fearful, that Iran could use its nuclear program to build atomic weapons. Now, this also comes amid really heightened regional tension right now. Israel has long been an opponent of Iran, and Israel has increasingly targeted Iran over the nuclear deal, had pushed the Trump administration to target Iran over the nuclear deal. So Israel could be a wild card on what it does. Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf Arab nations also could be wild cards about what they do. And the U.S. itself actually has deployed an American aircraft carrier and another bomber wing to the Persian Gulf over what it describes as unspecified threats from Tehran. So this, coupled with the ongoing regional tensions, really could put things in a much more precarious situation in the greater Middle East. This is John Gambrell for the Associated Press, reporting from Dubai in the United Arab